We begin the current Daf Mesech Nazir Daf Mem Vav. We begin on the bottom of Mem Hey Beis, 5 lines up at the bottom of the Amud. We continue the halacha, the Mishnah of this theme regarding the finishing processes of the Nazir. And he purifies himself regarding to bring his kabbanis and the hair cutting and all those different things, and when he becomes permitted in all the things that is prohibited for his whole period of Nazir. So discussing today's Daf are Tenufa. Tenufa is one of the procedures of the ceremony of the Nazir, and that's the waving process. And there's a question regarding if that's ma'akiv, if that's critical or not. And again, depending according to which opinion. When does the Nazir become permitted in the prohibited wine and tumah that he had, his whole tumah of Naziris? At what point of his ceremony does that become permitted? The halach of Nazir and Moichad, what do you do if the Nazir doesn't have something like, let's say, his hair or let's say his bald? All right. So what do you do then? You can't have the hair cutting ceremony, and what do you do in certain situations if you cannot perform a ceremony? Let's say some other one is missing his hand. So what do you do in those situations? Does it mean you cannot be right? So you don't have to do it. Regarding what happens if the karbanas were actually invalid. And when you do your carbon, that allows you to do the hair cutting. If you did the hair cutting, it turns out the carbon was possible. What happens then? Does that take away, like when you do the hair cutting, does it demolish when you did all that counting?
The hair is burnt out.
What?
The hair is burnt out.
Yeah, and the problem is anytime you do your hair cutting without doing your karbanas, so that actually makes you go over and do over again. So what happens in that situation? Which also is similar to nitbach hazrika, regarding if, let's say, you sprayed the blood of the carbon already, then it becomes a tummy. Before he got a chance to do the other parts of his ceremony, what happens then? Some of the other terms that come up in today's Rabbi Shloimy Schwartzberg, which that's the opening Mishnah Mesech Zvachim, that call a carbon are kosher, just just didn't fulfill the obligation of the person, except for Pesach and Chatas, where they, when the Shloimy Schwartzberg, it's actually considered as it's possible. So we begin the card Daf Yomi Beis, 5 lines up at the bottom of the Yomid. The Mishnah continues regarding this process of the purification. Says the Mishnah, so we know there was the Nazir is called a Shami Nazir. The Nazir would cook this shlamim, or shulkan, which is very much cooking it, like stewing it. So that's what he would do. He'd cook the shlamim. And a kohen niklas as raya b'shelim na'ayim. The kohen, he gets certain matnas kuhin. We know from every carbon, there's a specific that he would get the foreleg of the ram, which was the shlamim that was cooked, and we get the challah, which means like a loaf of matzah achas minasal, where because they were generally made unleavened, so this loaf was unleavened from the basket. V'rokik matzah achas, that's a loaf, whereas the rokik is like a wafer type. There was many different types of breads that the Nazir brought, and one unleavened wafer. And menoisen al kape hanazir, and he would put it onto the palms of the Nazir. Umenifan, and we go ahead and wave them holding these items. Okay, says the Mishnah, and then the achakar hutar hanazir l'shtisan l'tamal mesim. Then the Nazir becomes permitted to drink wine and become tamei to mesim. Which says that seems like that this Tana holds like Belazar that's mentioned in the Gemara that holds that you're not allowed to drink to wine, but you're not permitted in the prohibitions of the Nazir until after all the meisim that are mentioned in the Torah. So it's not enough that you already sprayed the blood of the carbon. You had to have done all these procedures, and then, including the tenufa, including everything, and then you could go ahead and then partake of the wine and become Tamil Meisim. He says, no, once one of the bloods are sprayed from the karbanis, as the Gemara is going to expound, after one maisa of the ceremony, even if one of the bloods are sprayed, he had a few karbanis, if one of them was sprayed, is already permitted to drink wine and to become Tamil Meisim. So that's machlekes. When does he become permitted? Which we're going to elaborate on that in the Gemara regarding like what part of the process is he already considered permitted. He has to do everything, but what is he really considered permitted? So Brisa, elaborating on this machlekes, says in the pasuk says in Bamidbar, it says that he's going to do this tenufa and with the breast and the thigh, but what's elevated, and it says va'achav, and afterwards yishta hanazir yain. That's how the pasuk ends. The Nazir will drink the wine. What does it mean after? So the first opinion holds achar ha'meisim kulam. The Rabbi Elazar says after everything that's mentioned there in the pasuk, because psukim beforehand talked about the korban, the hair cutting, the tnufa. Like in this pasuk, it said the tnufa. So after everything that was just said, which was all the different avodas, so that's like we said in the Mishnah. You have to do everything. That's the Rebbe Eliezer. The Chum, however, they disagree. They say no. They say even after one action, meaning, like Rabbi Shimon had said, as it sounds like from the Mishnah, as the Gemara explained, Daf Chav Chesem and Aleph, that even if you just pricked one of the bloods, you were yoytze, meaning you still have to do everything, but now you're ready to become permitted to drink wine and all the other things. Okay, so the Gemara wants to explain the sources of these opinions. My time in the Rabban, what's the reason that Rabbanon that they hold you have to do everything? So because Ksiv Hacham, it says over here, as we quoted the pasuk, and then afterwards the Nazir drinks wine. Okay, Ksiv Hacham, there's another pasuk, which actually the pasuk right before this, that speaks about the Tnufa. It says, Achar his galcha yas nizir. After they go and they cut off his head for his Nazir, meaning the hair of his head, then they'll do what the next pasuk, which is this pasuk, they'll do the Tnufa. So, Mahas and just like over there, the word Achar is Achar Ma'isichidi after a singular action. Meaning that Ach that's written near Taklachas, which is one action of hair cutting. So it's like Zer Shava. Afkan here also Achar Ma'isichidi, when the pasuk says Achar Yishkan Nazir Yayin, just like over there by Tnufa, he said that after what? After what the pasuk was talking about, it's Taklachas. After you cut the hair, then you do Tnufa. And so therefore here also it says Acha Yishlan Ozayayin after one thing, which is any one of the damim that are brought. So it says the Gemara Av Kanach Ma'isichid. So here also it's going to be after one thing. So says the Gemara Ema Ad Ikar Tarvayu. Why don't you say until there's both, meaning Karbonos and Taglachas, meaning, not to get confused, the Chacham over here is not the Chacham in the Mishnah. Meaning the Chacham in the Mishnah is Rabbi Eliezer, and when we say Chacham over here, we mean Reb Shimon. Reb Shimon has said that one thing that you're going to do is good enough. Where does he get this from? That's from, like we say here in the Brisa, Achamai Sichidi. What's the reason of the Rabbanan? It's because it says Ba'acha Yishtan Ozayayin, just like over there, Ba'acha Hiskal Ches Nizra means one thing. Here also, the Gemara says, how do you know it means one thing? It might take it that value, because like Tais explains, by after the hair cutting that you're saying for Tnufa, that's not only after the hair cutting. The hair cutting itself came after the Karbanas. So, and maybe it means after the Karbanas and the Teklachas, then you do the Tnufa. So when I'm going to make a Gzeir Shava of Achar, to say here also, Achar Yishtan Ozayayin, it means after two things also, meaning, or after everything, whatever it is, but it means after one thing, from the Gzeir Shava. So the Gemara says, yeah, but if that's the case, that's Achar Yishtan Ozayayin means everything, the Gzeir Shava Lamali. Then why don't you need a Gzeir Shava of Achar? That's the pashtus of the pasuk. If you read the pasuk, it sounds like, okay, bring your karbanos, do the hair cutting, do the tnufa, and Ba'achar Yishtan Ozayayin. So das wird sein the pashtus. I don't need no Gzeir Shava for that. If I have a Gzeir Shava, must be teach me something I wouldn't know from the pashtus of the pasuk. That's coming to teach me that Acha Ma'isichidi is going to be enough, and I don't have to do Ma'asikul. That's the understanding of the opinion of the Chachamim. That's the opinion of Reb Shimon. In that Mishnah, that's enough to do one of them. Our opinion of Rebbe Eliezer, that's self-understood, that you have to do everything, because that's the pastures of the Pesukah. Now, Amadah, Rav says, which is going to relate to this machlokes that we just mentioned, Rav introduces the following teaching. He said, Tunufa b'nazir, the Tunufa ceremony that you do of the waving, that we mentioned in the Mishnah, is ma'akeves, is critical. That until you do Tunufa, you're not allowed to drink the wine. Says the Gemara, leave the man. Wait a second. Who's Rav going like? Everything is going like the Rabbanon. How could that be? Taglachas, which the hair cutting is in the body of the Nazir himself. Amri Rabbanon loy ma'akva. We just quoted Rabbanon. This in meaning in the Brisa, the Chacham Omer. That's the Achamei Sechidi Reb Shimon of our Mishnah. Said that's not ma'akva even the hair cutting. All you have to do is spray the blood of one of the three karbanos that he brought, and then already you could drink wine from Tamamesa. So Tenufa, the waving, which generally throughout halacha of karbanos, that many karbanos have Tenufa, they're not ma'akiv. Maybe I do have to tell you that it's for sure not going to be ma'akiv. How could you tell me that ma'akeves would be according to the Chachamim? What do you mean, even without shaving? is not ma'akev. Tnufa mebayda after tnufa. So obviously it cannot be like the Rabbanan, what you're saying. Ella ali b'Rabbi Eliezer. Okay, so who are you going to say halacha like? It's like Rabbi Eliezer. Says Gemara, pshita. That's obvious. I wouldn't need you to tell me that, Rav, because Amr Rabbi Eliezer says Achamaisa Kulam. He said it has to come after everything, and it said Kabbalah, Tiklachas, Tnufa, and then it says Rachi Yishla Nazayayin. So I don't need Rav to tell me this halacha. That's pashut. Says Gemara, no. It's kind of like Rabbi Eliezer, and it's not so pashut. Why? Because Ma'odatim, what would you say? That Kivin Delin Kapala, since regarding atonement, shiur mitzvahi, like the Gemara says in the first parak of Zvach and Avav and the Beis, if you make tnufa shiur mitzvah, in other words, you didn't do it, like shirayim, like the leftovers. So the Gemara there says, it's as if you didn't get a kapara, because you didn't do the most choicest mitzvah, but it is that you did a kapara, because Lamais is not ma'akev. So generally, tnufa is not ma'akev. So I would say, since we find in general by many karbanas that by most of them, all of them, is not ma'akev. I would say here also, kamashmon, that's what we needed to tell me. That no, Rav is telling me that achamai sekul means yes, everything, even tenufa, that generally not ma'akev. So therefore that is the chiddush of Rav. But on that, ask the Gemara Zikatintam and Beis, okay, fine. Explaining that would be according to Blazer. But is it really true that it is ma'akev by Nazir, where generally tenufa is not ma'akev? But what Tanya learned the Bryce, it says the pasuk about Midbar, it says Zois Toiras Anasa. This, and generally the word Toiras is a ribui. It's including things. Zois Toiras Anasa. This is the halacha of the Nazir. What does that mean? This is the halacha of the Nazir. This halacha of the Nazir means that bein sheyesh lekapayim, whether he has palms, ubein she'ein lekapayim, whether he doesn't have palms. Now, all these taisin are on Amud Aleph. So the assumption of the Gemara at this point is like this. What are we comparing a guy who doesn't have palms to has palms? Is that just like when a guy doesn't have palms, which obviously cannot do tenufa, right? What's the tenufa process? We spoke about in the Mishnah. Said they put all these stuff on his hands, and they would do this waving ceremony. If he doesn't have hands, obviously he cannot do tenufa. So we're coming to compare that to the guy who has kapayim, to say that obviously tenufa is not ma'akev. And additionally, the Gemara is assuming that obviously this brisa cannot be like the Rabbanan. Why? Because if that would be the case, then what do you need Zois Toiras to teach me by comparing a guy who doesn't have palms to have palms? What do you mean you have the Gezerah Shava of Acher Acher? You told me that it means all you have to do is one thing. Obviously, Tenuba is not Ma'akev, because even Tekalacha is not Ma'akev. So according to Rabbanan, this brisa wouldn't make sense. So Narvas, let's go like Rabbi Eliezer. Aha, like Rabbi Eliezer. And what do you see? That by Tenufa, he agrees that is not ma'akiv. You're trying to tell me, Rav, that Tenufa by Nazir is ma'akeves, and you tell me it's only according to Rabbi Eliezer. But this Klara Brisa, it's telling me that Tenufa is not ma'akiv. Because it's comparing a guy who doesn't have palms to who has palms. The guy who doesn't have is not doing it. The guy who has is also not doing it. He's not ma'akiv. So the Gemara responds back and says, wait a second. Ve'lo Tanya. What do you do with the following brisa? It says in the pasuk, we're going to compare another context of halacha to a different one to show that you're incorrect in your reading of this brisa. We learned another brisa that says, whether he has here or he doesn't have here. Are you going to tell me that the hair cutting is not ma'akiv, that's not critical? In other words, you're going to tell me, you're going to read this brisa to say, oh, we're trying to compare a guy who has hair who doesn't have hair. To say that hair cutting is not ma'akiv, just like a guy who doesn't have hair won't be able to cut his hair. You're saying even if a guy has hair, it won't be ma'akiv. But that's not true. According to the Rabbanan, we wouldn't need Zois Toiras to learn that out because they know it from Acher Acher. Right? The Brisa cannot be the one that's saying Zois Toiras and Nazir for the here, can't be like the Rabbanan to tell me Takalacha is not ma'akiv, that you want to compare the guy who has it to doesn't have it, because that I know from Acher. So who's that Tana the Brisa? Must be Rabbi Eliezer. But he says Taklachas is ma'akeves. You're trying to tell me when you're reading the brisa that you're comparing the guy who has, who doesn't have. You're trying to tell me, it means that it's not ma'akiv. That's how you're learning the brisa with the palms and no palms. So you're trying to say, it means you don't have to have. But let's take a same brisa, same Zeis Teiras, just change the variable from palms to here. You compare the guy who has here that doesn't have here. Which way is it teaching us? Oh, you said it means that it's not ma'akiv. So let's do the same thing by the here. That can't be. Because Rabbanan who hold this not ma'akiv don't learn enough from Zeis Teiras. They learn from Acher, that only needs one thing, which is blood, and you don't need the here. So no, if I was like Rabbi Eliezer, but Rabbi Eliezer all teklachas is ma'akeves. So obviously you got this wrong. Obviously the comparison has to be the other way. You have to be comparing the guy who doesn't have to the guy who does have, to say, just like the guy who has here, has to put the razor over his head. This guy will put the razor over his bald head. That's what the Brisa must be teaching me. The rest doesn't read. So let's go back to the Brisa you asked from. The guy who doesn't have the palms and the guy who does have the palms, obviously coming to compare the guy who doesn't have to the guy who does have, to say that what? That he obviously has to go ahead and wave it on his arms when he doesn't have hands. That's obviously, so therefore it's not difficult. Obviously that Tanuva is ma'akiv. The Bryce is comparing. It's comparing to say that you got to put on his, exactly. Now Rashi just points out that since there's a Bryce that explicitly talks about a bald-headed Nazir, so therefore we bring this next part about the bald-headed Nazir. But really, we already have our proof already from this previous Bryce, as the Gemara says. But Tanya, learn the Bryce. It's just proving the point we just said. The Nazir Memoivet, if you have a bald Nazir, so B'Shamim they say, Ein tzarich laver ta'al reisha. You don't have to go ahead and put the razor over his head. They say, no tzarich laver ta'al reisha. You have to put the razor over his head. Which, again, that's the idea that we said, that the guy who has not still has to be like the guy who does have. And that's really the point. Now, this next Amar Ravina, there's two different interpretations in Taisus. That's what's going to extend this a little bit. But for Amar Ravina says, "My in the tzarich leBeishamai." What does it mean, according to Beishamai, that you don't need to? In other words, that the guy who's bald doesn't have to put the razor over his head. What does it mean? You don't have to. Ein tzarich means ein loy takana. Means to say that he has no remedy, meaning it's not going to help him at all. Now, what does that mean? It means according to Rabbi Eliezer, the whole taglachas ma'akeves, this bald Nazir will forever be forbidden to drink wine. He can't do the procedure. You have to do it. As we said, you are comparing the Ein Loi to Yeshloi. And that's again, this is all answering for Rav. Rav stands correct. The Tanuf is ma'akeves according to Rabbi Eliezer. So, according to Beishan, it says that a bald guy is ineffective. It's not going to do anything. So he lacks an end to means to end his naziras. He's very bad and forever. Now, according to Rabban, taklachas is only a mitzvah, not ma'akiv. So, okay, you just didn't fulfill the mitzvah, but it won't be ma'akiv. That's how Beishamai holds. Continues the Gemara. Beisil, yes, takana. According to Beisil, no, there is a remedy for a bald nazir. How so? No problem. He passes the razor over his bald head. Now, according to Rabbi Eliezer, the putting of the razor in the place of the hair cutting would permit him in wine, because taglachas makeres, but Beisil holds that is taglachas for the bald nazir. It's just to fulfill the mitzvah. So, as Tais says that you cannot explain that it says in the Brisa of Toiras Nazir is coming to tell you when we say whether he has here, whether he doesn't have here, is to compare the guy who has here to the guy who doesn't have here, meaning we're trying to say how Rav was proving from this halacha over here to the halacha of the Tanuf of the palms, where it was obvious that we're comparing the guy who doesn't have to the guy who does have, and not the other way around. Not the guy who does have to the guy who doesn't have. And that's both according to Rabbi Eliezer and according to Rabbanan, according to Beishamai, according to Beisil, as Tais explains. It says, if according to Beishamai, that the guy who has here has a remedy, right? He does the haircut. And if he doesn't have hair, so there's no remedy. So they're obviously not the same. Even according to Beis Hill, what are you comparing them for? The guy who has hair, the guy who doesn't have hair. Obviously, we know the guy who has hair, the pasuk explicitly says that he has to go ahead and cut off the hairs of his head. Obviously, it's only the one who doesn't have that we're coming to compare the guy who does have and to let us know, just like the guy who has hair, the pasuk explicitly tells us he has to take it off with a razor, so too the guy who doesn't have also has to go and pass over a razor, which it's Rabbi Eliezer going like Beis Hill. So therefore says the Gemara, that's the same thing for Rav, for the price you asked on. That we're obviously comparing the guy who doesn't have to the guy who does have to say that he has to do Tnufa. How is he going to do it? He doesn't have hand? Do it on your arms. So therefore that is the resolution for Rav. Now parenthetically, the Gemara just says, behind the Dura Perdas, that this halacha of Ravina that tells us that according to Beis Shammai, when he says Einet Tzarech, it means that in takana, which means you don't have to pass over the razor. What do I don't have to? Because it's not going to help you. That is like Rabbi Pedas, because what did Rabbi Pedas say? Rabbi Pedas says Beis Shammai Rabbi Eliezer. This Beis Shammai that we just quoted, and Rabbi Eliezer Amar Dover Echad. They say the same thing. My Rabbi Eliezer. What's this Rabbi Eliezer? So that's a different halacha somewhere else, but it's the same idea. We kind of like learn the Brisa. The Brisa says, what happens if, and this is going on a mitzayra. A mitzayra in his purification process has to go ahead and spray the dam on his big toe and on his thumb. So what happens, says the Brisa, he doesn't have a thumb, he doesn't have a big toe. That's part of his purification process. What do you do then? That's a machlokes. So the first opinion says, that's Rabbi Eliezer. Rabbi Eliezer says, this guy will never become pure for the rest of his life. Because you need to have the pasuk as it's written. You have to do it on the boin, yad the boin regel, al boin nois, and he doesn't have boin nois. So that's it. And that's like Beis Shammai.
Why don't we say that if he doesn't fulfill the requirements, that he doesn't become a Nazir?
He doesn't become a Nazir?
In other words, if he can't
complete it.
Why would that make him not a Nazir?
Right, once he says I'm a Nazir, he's a
Maybe his
Nazir.
das is only to become a Nazir to do the whole process.
Maybe get a Pesach of Charat to go become the Rav and say, if I would have known, I didn't know. Yeah, but that's if he didn't know. But if he knows, then he knows. Yeah, and the Chanam.
It's two separate things: becoming a Nazir and becoming not a Nazir.
Right. Yeah. That's
Right.
But it wouldn't be. It's not really Chasson you Kabbalas and Naziris. You just have no way out. Now, regarding the Mitzayra, this Rabbi Eliezer says Rabbi Das is saying the same thing as Beis Shammai. Now, obviously, that means to say the way Ravina explained. Obviously, Beis Shammai, when it says Ein Tzarech, means Ein Takana, if you hold the Rabbi Das. So that's exactly what Ravina that said that Beis Shammai is Ein Tzarech means that Ein Takana, because he's saying something like Rabbi Eliezer, who's saying that Ein Takana, that you have no remedy, that you're going to be tummy forever. That's the opinion of Rabbi Eliezer. Shimon, even though he disagrees, says Yanechena al Mekoymai b'Yatza. You just put it on the place of where the thumb would be, or where the big toe would be, and then you fulfilled your obligation that way. A third opinion, Machanim, they say you need a small b'Yatza. You put it on the left toe and the left thumb, and then you fulfill the obligation. But okay, al kaponim, one thing we see is that Rabbi Das is like Ravina. But we resolved Rav explaining his halacha like Rabbi Eliezer, that Tnufa is ma'akev, and his chiddush was that even though Tnufa generally is not ma'akev, here it will be ma'akev. We asked from a brisa made it sound like that just like when you don't have palms, you don't have to, so when you have palms, you don't have to. I thought you said them to be ma'akev. No, you're reading it backwards, and he proved it from the halacha over here that you have to read it the other way. That no, just like when you have here, it's ma'akev, so too when you don't have. Same thing is by the palms. When you have palms, it is ma'akev, so too when you don't have palms, it's ma'akev. What does that mean? Well, go ahead, do it on your arms, find some way. Therefore, that's exactly what Rav said. Now, the Gemara says, what we told you, Lishna Achrina Amrila. So we have a different version of this, meaning it starts off the same, but it goes the other way. Amar Rav. Rav says, Tenufa ben Naz Ma'akev, same halacha. The waving procedure by Nazir is Ma'akev. So the Gemara said, leave it out. So although in the first version we said it couldn't be like Rabban, it has to be like Rabbi Eliezer, now we're going to go the other way around. We can say, no, it can't be Rabbi Eliezer, it must be the Rabban. How's that? So the Gemara says, anything is going like Rabbi Eliezer. Of course, Pshita says Gemara. He says that you're only going to be yaitse, you're only going to be able to be mutter and yain, all these different things, if you do all the meisim that you have to do. Now, the gears, at least according to some that amended, the Re says and Taisus that it's obvious that even though the Gemara doesn't ultimately explain who Rav is like, the truth is Rav is like Rabbi Eliezer, and the truth is that the Gemara says it's Pashut according to Rabbi Eliezer in this part of the Lishna Achrina. It's not true. Just like we said in the first version, that I would have thought to say that no, I know he says Achamaisikul, but generally Tenufa is not Ma'akiv. So I would have thought to say that here also Tenufa wouldn't be Ma'akiv, Kamash Malon it is. So although our Gemara is going the opposite way, it's saying it can't be according to Eliezer, it's all Pasha, it's really Garabana, but the Gemara is not going to come out. The Gemara is going to say that no, it can't be, and Tais is just telling us that Lamais Maskan is going to be that Rav is like Eliezer. It's just the Gemara at this point assumed that no, that would be too Pasha. So okay, it can't be like Eliezer. I'll leave it at one. Rather, it must be that it's going according to the Rabbanah. Okay, so the question is, how could that be? If you're going to say that hair cutting is not ma'akiv, so Tenufa Mibayda, I have to tell you that the waving is going to be ma'akiv. How's that possible? So the Gemara says, Umiloi ma'akva? What do you mean? You think that according to Rabbanan that it's not ma'akiv? What are you talking about? We're talking about the Brisa. Meaning, you're trying to tell me that Tenufa cannot be ma'akiv if the hair cutting is not ma'akiv. The hair cutting is in the goof of the Nazir itself. According to Rabbanan, all you have to do is achamaisa echad. You have to just do the spraying of the blood. So how could Tenufa be ma'akiv? The Gemara says, no, it is ma'akiv. How can you say it's not ma'akiv? Because we're talking about the Brisa. It says in the Brisa, Zois Toiras HaNazir, this halach of the Nazir, bein sheish legabayim, whether he has palms, and bein sheish legabayim, whether he doesn't have palms. Now, here's where it gets a little bit tricky, because you might get confused from the first version. Taisa explains, according to this lishna, according to this version, the Gemara understands that what we're saying in the Brisa is just like when the guy doesn't have palms. Halacha makes it sound like that it's going to be ma'akiv. Why would you say that? Why would you nemnom? Why would you assume if a guy doesn't have palms, it's going to be ma'akiv? Because the famous Talmudic dictum of what's called kol she'ena v'ola bila ma'akeves. What that means to say is by the menaches, with the flour and the oil, you can't bring more than 60 Yisroinim in one buck, in one bowl. Why? Because you wouldn't be able to mix the flour and the oil well enough. It has to be mixed very well. But the Gemara says, what do you mean? The mixing is not in ma'akiv. So the Gemara answers the famous dictum that comes up throughout Shas, yeah, but it has to be able to. If you're not able to, then it's actually ma'akiv. So you don't have to do it, but you have to be able to do it. So the thing is, if a guy doesn't have palms, Tenufa is going to be ma'akiv. I thought Tenufa is not ma'akiv. Yeah, but you have to be able to do Tenufa.
Over there it's a svara or
So it's actually a discussion. There's actually pasuk and there's a svara, right? So it's two different versions. But Akaban, that's the svara that comes out that it has to be, and the Gemara uses it throughout. You have to be able to do something, and if not, it's going to be ma'akiv. So therefore, we're saying that just like we know when you don't have palms, it's zichiz ma'akiv. Oh, so now if it's like Rabbi Eliezer, so then I know it's ma'akiv from Achar Kol HaMaisim. He says, V'achar Yishta Nazir Yain means after everything. Must be that the Bryce is going like, according to Rabbi Eliezer, I don't need to compare someone who doesn't have to the guy who does have palms. Meaning, I know for sure, again, you have to hold up because we're saying the opposite, so we're reading this Bryce in many different ways. The Gemara is assuming in the Lishna Achrina that when you tell me you're comparing the guy who doesn't have palms to the guy who does have palms, you're saying just like the guy who doesn't have palms, Zich is not Yotzeh. Why is Zich not Yotzeh? Because Bilam HaKeves, but if you can't do it, then for sure you're not Yotzeh. So too, if you have palms, it's going to be Ma'akiv, which is exactly the teaching of Rav. Now, Taisa is just explaining, the Gemara trying to figure out who's Rav like. Rabbi Eliezer, Rabbanan, said, nah, it can't be Rabbi Eliezer. Must be like Rabbanan. And where do you see, according to Rabbanan, that's Ma'akiv? This Brisa. Well, how do you know it's like Rabbanan? Can't be like Rabbi Eliezer. Because Rabbi Eliezer holds, everything is Ma'akiv from Achamai Sekula. He learns Achar Yishta Nazir Yain means after everything. So of course we know Teklachas, we know everything from there. I don't need to have a limud to teach me from Zois Tairas. Must be like Drabanan. Although they say Achamai Sichidi that one the blood is enough and nothing else is Ma'akiv, But tenufa is ma'akiv. How do you see that? So it's teiras. So his teiras is telling you that we're comparing the guy who does have hands to doesn't have hands. Just like the guy who doesn't have hands, the tenufa is ma'akeves. So the guy who does have hands, tenufa is ma'akeves. So therefore, says the Gemara, obviously you see that tenufa is ma'akeves. According to Rabbanan, the way Rav is explaining. Okay, then says the Gemara, Velo the Tanya, but then what do you do with the following brisa? Says Zois Teiras Nazir. This is the the Nazir. It used the same word Zois Teiras to tell you to Teiras is also a universality, meaning it's like comparing Ben Sheyesh Lisav or Ben She'en Lisav, whether he has here or whether he doesn't have here. Are you telling me Hachanami Dema'akva? You just told me by the palms that's comparing the guy who has palms to the guy who doesn't have. Just the guy who doesn't have, it's ma'akiv. So too, the guy who has ma'akiv. So you're telling me the guy who has here doesn't have here, it's also doing the same thing of it being ma'akiv? To tell me that the guy who has here is going to be ma'akiv just like the guy who doesn't have here is ma'akiv? But in the price that says, Nazir Mamayre, the bald Nazir, they say, in a tzach lahabatal, you don't have to put the razor over the head. They still say, you have to put the razor over the head. Now, the Gemara continues to explain. Now, this actually could depend on the versions of Tosfos, but the Gemara continues. It says, Amar Bavina. He says, "My tzarich lebeis Hillel." What does Beis Hillel mean to say that you have to tzarich ve'ein lo takana? You have to, and you don't have a remedy. Why not? Why don't you have a remedy? Oh, because we know the halacha. If you're not able to do something, it's a bila ma'akeves boy. Now, the question is from the next part, really, and this is according to the first curious of Tosfos. But lebeis Shammai, when Beis Shammai says that ein tzarich, is that yesh lo takana, that the guy has a remedy. As Shais explains, according to this version, according to Beis Shammai, we're comparing the guy who doesn't have here to the guy who does have here. Meaning, Zois Teiras Anaz is telling you whether a guy has here, whether he does not have here, according to Beis Shammai, we're comparing the guy who doesn't have to the guy who does have. Meaning, that the guy who's bald, what he should do is, he should pass a razor over his head, and therefore here also we're coming to compare the guy who doesn't have palms to the guy who does have palms, to say that he has a remedy to wave it on his arms. That's how we're learning Beis Shammai in this version. Which Tosfos says, wait a second, don't ask, that maybe we're coming to compare the guy who does, not having to yes have it. Maybe he's comparing the guy who does have to the guy who doesn't have, and maybe it's like Beis Hillel, so it says no. But according to Beis Hillel, you wouldn't be able to ask from a brisa of Nazir and Ma'avid, because anyways you could ask and say it's not true. According to Rabbanan, first of all, Teklachas is not ma'akiv. And according to Elazar, we already know it from Acher Kol HaMaisim, from Acher. I wouldn't need to have Zois Teiras. So it must be, it's going like Beis Shammai. So it's going like Beis Shammai. What do you see? You see that there is a remedy, and upliga the Repedas. And that Ravina disagrees with Repedas that it's not like Rabbi Eliezer. Meaning the first version we read, that Ravina was like Repedas. What did we say? We said when Beis Shammai says that Ein Tzarich, what do you mean Ein Tzarich? Meant to say that Ein Le Takana. There's nothing we can do for you. And this version, we're saying that no. Beis Shammai says Ein Tzarich means to say that actually that it's not a problem. Not that Ein Le Takana. It just means Ein Tzarich, he doesn't need to shave. Because passing a razor over his head is a valid fulfillment of obligatory shaving. That's how we're learning Beis Shammai in this second version. So, this that Ravina said, that the Nazir Memoyla, the bald Nazir, according to Beis Shammai, has a remedy, which is pass the razor over your bald head, that disagrees with Pedas, because he says, Beis Shammai and Rabbi Elazar saying the same thing. And Rabbi Elazar says that you don't have hands, you don't have thumbs, sorry, you're never becoming tough. Shammai, according to this version of Ravina, doesn't hold like that. He holds that, no, go ahead. Do whatever you have, even if it's not that thing, and you'll be like. Now, really, we could go on to the next mission at this point, but Taisa has a Lishna Achrina. Taisa has another version. It's actually, a lot of these depend on your sois in Taisa itself, but the way the Marav Ranchberg adds on the words, Amr Rebavina, that it's actually that Rebavina is giving an answer. So he goes through the Gemara again, and he says, the Gemara's question was, wait a second, I will in the Braisa, how you're telling me what it means to say that comparing the guy who has palms who doesn't have palms. I will in the Braisa that whether he has here doesn't have it here, and we'll in the Braisa it says the bull Nazir, and they still say tzarich. They still say, yes, you have to. Tzarich will have a toleration. So explains this second version of Taisis. The Gemara assumes that when Basil says tzarich, it means tzarich v'yesh le'takan. Not like we were explaining up until now, I mean, so they have to, meaning, and that's going to be the remedy. And the way you explain the Bryce is like this. Just like a guy who has here, we know he has to pass the razor over his head. Whether, according to Rabbanan, just ask for a mitzvah, or according to Eliezer, like for ma'akiv, it's critical. If you don't have here, tzarech. Basil tzarech means to say, so you have to, and that will remedy in that situation. Again, either like for the mitzvah or to the ma'akiv. So therefore, says the Gemara, same thing is regarding the other brisa. Just like a guy who has palms, he's going to do tenufa as a mitzvah. So too, the guy who doesn't have palms has to do the waving in his arms. So on that Ravina is Daicha, and he says, no, from here you cannot prove that it's not ma'akiv. Because most definitely, because that would sound like that's not ma'akiv. Because you could do it however you want to do it. So obviously you're not doing the primary, that means to say the klach is not ma'akiv, because you could just do on the bald head. Obviously, it's never not ma'akiv because you can do it on the arm, and that's what you're saying from Beis Hill that he says that tzarech. What I mean tzarech? It doesn't have here. Tzarech means to say do whatever you could. Oh, so obviously not ma'akiv. That's how the Taisa explained the Gemara's question. And that Ravina is doicha. So he's not explaining according to the second version. According to the second version, he's coming to answer a question. According to the first version of Taisa, he was part of the discussion. It flowed right in. According to this, he's answering the question. He says, no, you cannot prove there's not ma'akiv, because most definitely, tzarich means to say, ve'ein loy takana, not the way you were reading it. According to the second version, the Gemara was assuming one way, and Ravina is answering. So he's not just explaining, he's answering. And he's saying that no, there's no remedy. That's what Basil is saying. And he's saying, just like when you don't have here, it is ma'akiv. So too, because why is it ma'akiv? Because he's not royal abila, he's not able to do it, so therefore it's ma'akiv. So when you have here, it is going to be ma'akiv. But Taisa just said tzarech on this, because if that's the case, that means to say you're saying like a Eliezer. So because who holds teklach is ma'akev? It's Rabbi Eliezer, not Rabbanan. But if that's the case, so what do you need Zayis Teras? You should learn from the word acher. Acher yishtan naziyam, which means acher kol ha'maisim. And if we're coming to say that, no, the Gemara is not concerned with this question, if that's the case, so then also that regarding tenufa, then you could say that that's going like everyone that would be ma'akiv, and like Rabbi Eliezer. Additionally, the question is that the Gemara says in Menachos Daf Testament Aleph that wherever the Torah says Torah and Chukah, wherever it says those two words in the parasha, it's ma'akiv. So the Gemara assumed that you need both. Nazir, it says these Torah and Nazir, and Rav says Snoop is ma'akiv by Nazir, and it doesn't say Chukah. So the Gemara answers, but since it says Ken Yasa, so it's like as if it said the word Chukah. Now, the problem with this is in our Gemara, the Gemara explains it's like Rabbi Eliezer, but that should be because of Acher Kol HaMaisim. So we're struggling here how to understand how you're saying like Rabbi Eliezer, because you're saying Tekalach is Ma'akiv, that's how you explain the Gemara according to the second version of Taisis. But according to Rabbi Eliezer, you know it from where? From Acher, but the Gemara Menachos makes out you learn from somewhere else. Additionally, Taisis asks from the Gemara Menachos Daf Zayin. It says that the two types that the Nazir bring are Ma'akiv each other, the two loaves. So the Gemara explains because it says Ken Yasa. But what do you mean? You think that's not according to Rabbanan? It's only according to Rabbi Eliezer? So Tosfos says that what you can answer is like this: that no, for sure, according to Rabbanan, they are ma'akiv one the other, but it's not ma'akiv from drinking wine. So even though you can explain it that it could be like the Rabbanan, but you still have the first question that Tosfos asked from the being ma'akiv. So Tosfos says that sugi over there is like the Lishna Basra that we have over here in our Gemara. And the way you have to understand is like this. Rava says Tnufa by Nazir is ma'akiv. So l'chayru, what it seems like what he means to say is, it's ma'akiv the person from drinking wine. So the Gemara says, if it's like Rabbi Eliezer, obviously, because achi ishtan Nazir means you have to finish everything. If it's like Rabbanan, I understand. If taglachas itself is not ma'akiv, so in other words, Tosfos explaining that the Gemara's question is miloi ma'akva, meaning, in other words, that even though it's not going to hold back the nazir from drinking wine according to the Rabbanan, so Kavachaymer, the Teklachas, however, should be ma'akiv the shlamim according to the Rabbanan, like we learned in Menachos, that the two types of nazir ma'akiv one with the other, that's even like the Rabbanan. I will learn the Brisa Zois Teiras, that whether he has palms, in other words, Zois Teiras is being ma'akiv, like the Gemara says over there in Menachos Avites, Teiras sounds to be ma'akiv. Or like the Gemara says over there, that it relies on kenyasa, but although that it's not ma'akiv from drinking wine, but it should be ma'akiv regarding the shlamim, and you would have to do other shlamim. But then this that you learn in the Brisa, whether you have here, whether you don't have here, so you're going to try to say there also that because of Teiras, that it's going to tell you that, but I would learn that Nazir and Ma'id, they still say that tzarich lahav tal reishay. And the Gemara understands now what does it mean tzarich, and there is a remedy. Obviously, according to Beis Hillel, that Ma'id is not ma'akiv. The Gemara answers, no, that's not what Beis Hillel holds. Beis Hillel, when they say tzarich, it means tzarich ve'ein lo takana. Oh, if that's the case, there's places that it's according to this Lishna Basra that we explained in the week teaching of Rab, that is ma'akiv for the Rabbanan with carbon. And it's because of the Chenyasa, the Gemara explains over there in Menachos, so that was a very complex Tosfos, but Tosfos just explained that it could be like to resolve the Gemara Menachos, how that's like, you're right, it's not according to Rabbi Eliezer, it's really according to the Rabbanan, and according to Rabbanan, we say, even taglach is not ma'akiv, that's regarding the drinking of the wine. But regarding the shlamim, you're right, it actually is going to be ma'akiv. The tnufa is going to be ma'akiv according to Rabbanan, even according to Rabbanan, because that's going on the carb. Okay, that was the end of this Gemara. Now we get to the halacha of the next Mishnah, continuing on this procedure, the ceremony of the Nazir when he finishes. Kilach al hazevach. Now, what happens if, let's say, okay, he sprayed the blood of his carbon, which that allows him now to go ahead and move on to the hair cutting, but then benimtza pasal, they find out that the carbon is actually invalid, either because the blood spilled out, or because it was taken out of the azara, or came tamei. What happens now says the Mishnah is taglachase psula. Okay, his hair cutting is invalid. Why? Since at the time of his hair cutting, even one blood wasn't sprayed valid. So it's because it was puzzle. So it's essentially like when bandits cut his hair. And when bandits cut his hair, what's called the acham alois, even after his nazir is over, we said in the beginning of the parak on Daf Lamed Tes, we said according to Belez it says for 7 days, according to Rabbanan it says for 30 days. So his hair cutting is invalid, and uzvachav, and his karbanas, meaning the other karbanas that he sacrificed after his invalid hair cutting, la'oloi, they don't count for him. Because since he really had to wait till his hair grows back. So when he sacrificed the other karbanas, it wasn't fit for the glachas. You have to consider the other karbanas as if he sacrificed it before or during the days of his nazir. Similarly, continues the Mishnah, if let's say he cut his hair on a chatas, but that chatas is brought not for the sake of a chatas. And then he brought his karbanas, the other ones, for their sake. The hair cutting that was done only after the chatas is invalid. And these other karbanas are not going to be valid for him because the Gemara says in the beginning of Masechtas Zvachim that although all karbanas that were slaughtered Shlosh are kosher, but they don't fulfill the owner's obligation for his obligation except for Pesach and Chatas, Here, your hair was cut, and you did your korbanos, although those were done l'shma, doesn't make a difference. It was like during your naziris, because your hair was cut before those korbanos were brought, and that was invalid because the chatzah was done shalei l'shma. Now, however, let's say gilach alo oilo oila shlam shalei l'shma. Let's say we said if you do on one new korbanos according to Reb Shimon is enough. Now you cut your hair for an oil or shlam, and they were done shalei l'shma. And then you go and bring your korbanos for their sake. The hair cutting was invalid because since it didn't fulfill your obligation, your oil and shlam of Nazir, it's like as if you cut your hair on the oil and shalmi not in the double, which is not effective because done shalei l'shma. Although the korban is kosher, but it wasn't valid for your shalmi Nazir, and there's ochel and therefore the other korbanos again are not going to be valid. It's as if you cut your hair during the Nazir. Shimon, he says no. He says that carbon that was slaughtered shalei l'shma, that carbon is le'oloi. That's not going to count for him for his obligation, and he's going to have to bring another carbon to take his place because obviously that was done shalei l'shma. But the other carbons will count for him, like the Gemara is going to bring from Shimon, that you could do your hair cutting on shalmei nedava. Even that was into nedava, you'll be yaitze. So yeah, consider nedava, but you yaitze even if it was a shalmei nedava. Now says the Mishnah, if let's say you cut your hair on after all three karbanas, and you find that one of the three were kosher and the others are puzzle, so the hair cutting is going to be valid according to everyone, and then you go ahead and you bring the other karbanas. Now the Gemara just explains, we'll just do this. Gemara says, this tells us that Ksav Reb Shimon, obviously Reb Shimon holds, not even one of his regular karbanas. He takes the nedava of a shlamim, he fulfills the obligation. Well, how do you see that? Says the Gemara, because meaning a oil and the shalmei nazir that was slaughtered shaloi l'shma are like a nedava. So when he says in the Mishnah, he did a shaloi l'shma, you be yaitze, you see he holds even the does enough. So the Gemara says, my temple, what's the reason for this? So the Gemara, because the Amar Kadabas says, that he's going to put on the fire his hair that he cut ashatach as a shlam that's beneath the carbon shlamim. But like because of a shlamav, doesn't he on his shlamim? It's just a shlamim, any shlamim. Even shalmei nadav. That Taisa Girsa actually is the opposite, as Marav points out. He says, what's the reason? Because the pasuk says al zevel toy shlamav, and it doesn't say shlam. So Taisa says, but from the fact that the pasuk changed the wording, that it really should have said just shlamim, it says shlamav. That change of wording, which Taisa brings that the Gemara Menachas says that includes shalmei nazir to compare it for the halachas l'shmanim, and the other thing, same thing is also it's comparing it like, for example, let's say you bring a toida, which is a shlamim. So that's what Taisa saying. That's that idea. If you bring a toida, which is a shlamim, if you do the hair cutting on it, you're going to be yaitzi. Also, again, that proves the same idea that even though it's not his own carbon, it's a type of a shlamim. That's going to be enough to fulfill his obligation. Thank you anytime.